This is TWiT.
The thing that concerns me, and this was a story from NBC I saw earlier this week that actually really scared me. Biden has been presented with options for massive cyber attacks against Russia, and this comes from NBC's sources: 2 intelligence officers with the U.S., 1 Western intelligence official, and another person briefed on the matter. Biden was presented with, now, I guess I would imagine in a case like this, the president is presented with many, many options, not all of which are, serious or on the table, or not all of which he would actually consider. I'm hoping he doesn't consider these, including an attack on the Russian internet to disrupt internet connectivity across Russia, shutting off electric power, tampering with railroad switches. That did happen in Belarus. An individual hacker shut down the Belarus railway system a couple of weeks ago. A person briefed on the matter said you could do everything from slow the trains down to have them fall off the tracks. My concern is if we allow this conventional warfare to become cyber warfare, the damage goes worldwide, and it comes right back to us. Lisa, does it seem to you that this is a war that we should not be fighting as a cyber war?
I think it's important to sort of reframe the war in general and to understand that if you talk to a lot of people in the tech security space, they're going to argue that we've been at war with Russia for quite a while anyway.
75% of all ransomware comes out of Russia.
You have to remember, Russia has been actively interfering in U.S. elections on national and local levels since at least 2014, if not earlier. I've been going to RSA every year since, I want to say 2015, 2016. And this is something that I've heard in private one-on-one conversations with sources. This is something I've heard when I've sat in on sessions. This is something I've heard in keynotes, which is that the nature of 21st century warfare is cyber warfare. And it can be anything from destabilizing elections so that the population loses belief in the legitimacy of elections. It can be creating memes and monkeying with sources of information so that people don't know what sources of information to trust. And that helps erode a chance of a national dialogue where everybody's working from the same definition of reality. You do have state-sponsored agencies that have hacked into U.S. companies across all sectors, from transportation to utilities to retail to private security. These efforts have been ongoing for quite some time. What's a little unusual right now, I think, is that we have a story which has hit NBC, and I would suggest that the Biden administration has probably been floating it out there as a PSYOPs thing too, that says, you know what, we're going to take this war to cyberspace because that is where 21st century warfare is. I think it's a shift in how we are defining and looking at war. But these are activities that have gone on for quite some time already. A
spokesperson for the National Security Council told NBC, "This report is wildly off base and does not reflect what is actually being discussed in any shape or form." But it's kind of like Putin saying, hey, don't forget, we've got nukes.
Well, they always say that, though.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to belittle. So fun fact, my dad worked on nuclear subs through the 70s and 80s.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. And no, it was, and I grew up, I'm a Gen Xer. So, we grew up with the threat of nuclear war. And Leo, I'm sure you remember in the 80s when they had The Day After. Remember that TV movie, the whole thing? So at the time we were living in Tidewater, Virginia, and I was a kid and I was completely freaked out about, oh my God, what if the Soviets nuke us in our beds? How would we survive?
Oh, I lived my whole childhood in the fear of that.
Yeah, duck and cover.
I was born in 56, so we had duck and cover drills, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Mm-hmm. We came very close to nuclear war in 1963. In fact, I remember visiting McGeorge Bundy, who was the national security advisor to President JFK at that time. He's the guy who woke up Kennedy and said, "Mr. President, we found satellite photos of missiles in Cuba," and went through that. And I remember visiting his house, his apartment in New York City, and he had really interesting thing on his coffee table. It was a month of October with some little pins in it. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh yeah, JFK gave all of this. That's the 10 days in October that we were, we came within inches." He gives credit to his wife, Mary, because he came home one day from the White House and he said, "We're this close to nuclear war with Russia," and she said, "McGeorge, you can't let that happen. You have to go in there and you have to fight for peace. You cannot let this happen." I don't think anybody knows, he talks about it in his memoirs, how close, but I remember talking to him about it, how close we came. And I feel like cyber warfare it's not as bad as nuclear warfare. You're not going to get a scorched earth. But if it escalates, I feel
like it's a little more corrosive in some ways.
We're living on the edge. We have 5 days of food, our financial system, our electrical grid, all of it's vulnerable.
If you take a look at how things unraveled in the early days of the shutdown in 2020, that did expose a lot of weaknesses in how the U.S. and the companies that live and work in the U.S. have chosen to structure like supply chains in transit. But if you do a little bit of reading, and one of the things I would love to recommend to everybody who's listening or watching this, Brad Smith, who is a president at Microsoft and its and Microsoft's chief counsel, wrote a fantastic book a couple of years ago it's basically a primer for what's going on right now, and it's called Tools and Weapons: The Promise and Peril of the Digital Age. And in a couple of chapters, he lays out the surveillance that Microsoft, as a private company, has been doing on the Russian government for years, because Russia's state-sponsored agency has been doing things like trying to register domains that it can pass off as Microsoft domains to capture user information, sift through it, and then use it to break into places. Cyber warfare has proven super effective in some ways already. I mean, you take a look at the election, 2016, 2020, you take a look at the Senate elections in 2018, there was evidence of interference there too. And we did include this link later in the show, but Russian meme factories and disinformation campaigns have been super effective throughout the pandemic as well. When you're talking about siloed realities where people get together based on like affinity rather than geographic connections or even a sense of national thing, like that weakens a nation, and it's been super successful so far.
Yeah. I after seeing how surprisingly poorly Russia's fared in Ukraine, I feel like that maybe they will turn to this cyber war where even a small nation like, say, North Korea can hire enough hackers to be really disruptive in the world. We've got China, we've got North Korea, we've got Russia. I assume that we have capabilities, similar capabilities in the United States, but I would also hope that we would be careful about using those because of the risk to civilian populations. That's the flip side of cyber warfare, is it affects civilians on such a greater scale and in ways I don't think anyone who hasn't been part of it can wrap their brains around, because it can affect everything from your ability to hit your bank balance, to whether or not you have money in retirement, to whether or not you're able to get gas, to whether or not you're able to have the power on. It's an astonishing scope compared to street-to-street geographic warfare, where people have the option to flee. We live in such a heavily networked international economy at this point that there will be people affected all over the place who are nowhere near where the fighting is. If you were to take this to a purely computer networked or a data first fighting angle. Atlantic had an article that talked about a 1993 RAND report called, this is 1993, remember, Cyber War is Coming, ! Yeah. The authors, I'll read you a little bit of it. The thesis of this think piece is that the information revolution will cause shifts both in how societies may come into conflict and how their armed forces may wage war. And they talk about cyber war, which is the kind of warfare we're talking about, bringing down a power grid or bringing down the water system, both of which, by the way, Russia has already done to Ukraine, and what looks like a kind of a test of their capabilities. But they also talk about net war. We don't use that term nowadays. We call it disinformation. Societal level ideational conflicts waged in part through interneted nodes of communication. This was written in 93, before there was a Facebook, before there was a Twitter, before there were these mass disinformation campaigns. But these guys really kind of understood how this could be used against a population. You know, they say that one of the reasons the Nazis had such success is because Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, understood and used radio, the new technology of radio, so effectively. It could very well be that a country that doesn't, Russia's, it's got an economy the size of Texas. It does have nukes, but it also, you don't have to be this great economic power to have a very powerful cyber army in effect.